Okay, today I will be discussing transitions for contrasting ideas. But before we start, let's review how to use transitions. Okay, let's talk about order. A transition comes between two independent clauses. So you have independent clause 1, transition, and independent clause 2. A transition also shows the relationship of the second sentence to the first sentence. So, for example, independent clause 1, everyone owns a cell phone these days. Transition, consequently, a transition of cause and effect. People don't use payphones. Okay? Here we have a cause and effect transition. It's showing and consequently introduces an effect. So it shows that people don't use payphones, that is independent clause 2, is an effect of independent clause 1, everyone owning a cell phone. Okay, so that shows the relationship, that shows that transitions show signal the relationship between the second sentence and the first sentence. Another thing we have to understand is that a comma follows a transition. Okay, that's punctuation, so make sure that a comma comes after the transition. Now, talking about commas, let's talk a little bit more about punctuation. Two things can come before a transition. First, you can have a period or a semicolon. Okay, so for example, period, independent clause 1, everyone owns a cell phone these days, period. Okay, transition, consequently, people don't use payphones anymore. Note that there is that after the period, consequently, that is, the transition is capitalized. Let's look at a semicolon now. Independent clause 1, everyone owns a cell phone these days, semicolon, transition, consequently, comma, independent clause 2, people don't use payphones anymore. Also note that after a semicolon, the transition is not capitalized. All right, let's talk about transitions of contrast now, and what are they? Okay, so what are they? Speakers and writers use certain words and phrases to signal a contrast or difference between two ideas. Okay, so we're going to learn to use these transition words and phrases to signal contrasting ideas. We will be learning about, on the contrary, in contrast, on the other hand, instead, however, nevertheless, and nonetheless, about one, two, three, four, five, six, 7 different transitions of contrast. But there are actually 4 types. The first one is transitions specifically of contrast, that is thing 1 versus thing 2. The second type of transition is of concession, that is expectation versus reality. The third type is the transition that does both contrast and concession. And the last type that we will look at is to elaborate negative statements, transitions that elaborate negative statements. Let's get started with transitions that are specifically used to contrast things. Okay, so use, on the other hand, in contrast, and conversely, to contrast two ideas or two things. Two ideas or two things. So, for example, in contrast, thing 1, idea 1. Those apples are sweet. Thing 2, idea 2. In contrast, these lemons are sour. Okay, conversely, thing 1, idea 1. Motorcycles are fast. Thing 2, idea 2. Conversely, cars are safe. Okay, that is using contrast. Let's move on now. Something I need to mention about on the other hand. On the other hand is specifically a transition that is used to compare one of two choices or two sides of an issue. Okay, so it could be one of two choices, could be like, for example, lemons versus tangerines versus mandarins, or I don't know, politics, Democrats versus Republicans. They're two different sides of an issue. Here we're just going to do the nice buying a lottery ticket, very innocent. So buying a lottery ticket might seem like a waste of money. On the other hand, on the other side of the issue, it might be the best investment you ever make. Interesting thing about it, on the other hand, is that it is there's similar expressions in other languages. Think about your own language if you have a similar expression to on the other hand. Moving on now, let's look at transitions of expectation versus reality. These are transitions of concession. Okay, use nevertheless and nonetheless to contrast an expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. Okay, for example, let's look at nevertheless. Okay, expectation. He lost a fortune gambling, therefore he was poor. If he lost a fortune gambling, he would be poor. Okay. Reality. Nevertheless, he is still rich. Okay. We expect that if he loses a fortune gambling, he should be poor, but nevertheless, the reality is he is still rich. Okay. Expectation. He lost a fortune gambling. Nevertheless, the reality is he is still rich. Let's look at another example. Nonetheless, expectation. Their motorcycles were faster. Therefore, his car lost the race. That's the expectation. Their motorcycles are faster. Therefore, his car lost the race. Reality. Nevertheless, his car won the race. Okay? We expect that if their motorcycles are faster, they should win. Nonetheless, his car won the race. So, here we're using, these are transitions of concession. They are used to show a contrast between expectation and a sudden or unexpected reality. Moving on now, we're going to look at transition. However is kind of special. However can be used to contrast two ideas or two things, or an expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. So let's look at contrast. Thing one, those apples are sweet. Thing two, however, these lemons are sour. Concession, expectation. Their motorcycles were faster. Therefore, his car lost the race. Reality, however, his car won the race. Their motorcycles were faster. However, his car won the race. Okay. Let's look now at transitions for contrasting ideas, specifically looking at those that elaborate negative statements. Okay. Use instead and on the contrary to follow and add information to a negative statement or to propose a substitute. That is not X but Y. So for example, on the contrary, negative statement. Peaches don't have a lot of vitamin C. Elaboration. On the contrary, they only have 6.3 milligrams. Now it is 15% vitamin C, but compare that to, say, oranges that have 60%. Okay, so this statement is true. So peaches don't have a lot of vitamin C, negative statement. Elaboration, on the contrary, they only have 6.3 milligrams. Okay, let's look at instead. Negative statement. Don't drive a motorcycle. Substitute. Instead, drive a car because they are safe. Okay? So, here we are looking at not X but Y, proposing a substitute. Okay, let's do a quick summary. Use, however, on the other hand, in contrast and conversely to contrast two ideas or two things, again. Those apples are sweet. In contrast, those lemons are sour. Thing versus thing, or idea versus idea. Number two, use however, nevertheless, and nonetheless to contrast an expectation with a sudden or unexpected reality. He lost a fortune gambling. Nevertheless, he is still rich. Use instead and on the contrary to follow and add information to a negative statement or to propose a substitute. That is not X but Y. Okay. Negative idea. Peaches don't have a lot of vitamin C. Don't. Elaboration. On the contrary, they only have 6.3 milligrams. Okay, that concludes this presentation. If you're looking at my sources for pictures, I got them from here. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. If you have any thoughts or concerns, please email me, and I look forward to seeing you in class. Have a wonderful afternoon.